Welcome back to the Man in Iron Mask YouTube channel. Thank you for tuning in. Today, I want to speak about my wrap-up 2024. I get it. I know. We're in 2025. It's January. It's almost February. But, I condensed down what I read. I listed the top 6 because I couldn't pick 5. There's one of them there that's competing with the other 5, which would be impossible to choose from. So this will be a rundown of all the things that I read in 2024, the physical things, physical copies of books that I read, aside from audiobooks, aside from other snippets or articles or things like that, or short stories online or whatever. This is just the physical books that I read in 2024. All right, let's get into it. Quick disclaimer is that I've never really been such a prolific reader, not too much of a fast reader. I deliberately try to read slow. I will sometimes stop on a paragraph and reread it, sometimes read the whole thing again. It's just kind of like my OCD and also just my, love of reading. I kind of want to seep myself in the idea and in the thought or in the phrase or in the beauty of the words. I kind of love words for the sake of words. So that, and also I tend to read bigger books, or sometimes more classic works of literature, and those tend to be a little bit more dense or a little bit more bulky, or have the footnotes, and I can't miss a footnote. It's part of my just analytical brain that's a little bit over wired or something like that. I just kind of want to soak in information. I kind of have a desire to know. It's very strong, and I'm pretty sure readers generally do that or have that, but I just love to know things, just tidbits, facts, and all that kind of stuff. So without further ado, let's get into it. So these are the books that I read in no chronological order in 2024. Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. Great read, absolutely accessible, very easy to read, not very dense, has some minor philosophical ideas there. People entertaining themselves to death, having, mass television screens in the center of their homes. Their entire lives revolve around this. It's not good to think. It's not good to read. It's not, all these things are, suppressed, and there's firefighters who come and burn books. And I believe that, the young generations should read this book. Any generation should read this book, and they'd love it and find a lot of richness in it, but definitely very important for the youth. I believe it will instill and inspire in them, a love for reading, the importance of reading, and the fact that it could be taken away from you, and the dangers of that, the absolute catastrophe that would be. And actually, even if people aren't burning the books per se, or getting firefighters to come to your home to burn your books or whatever. In a way, the television's already doing that. The mind numbing and the culture and the stimulus is already doing that without having to enforce the fire. It's almost like the fire subliminal. It's it's already burning up the books, or your desire, your inspiration to want to be literate, to want to read. It's already happening. So one that you should definitely read. And then I read this one for, it was on the syllabus, and Shakespeare Sonnets. This was a reread. I had read this and always opened it randomly and reread the ones that I had highlighted as my favorite sonnets. I found myself highlighting new ones as favorite ones, and I found that there's a lot of wisdom in it, obviously. I found that, it's kind of like one of those books that when you come back to it, when you're in a different age. When I was young, I highlighted the ones that I loved for their beauty and their just, ability, Shakespeare's ability to just, make metaphors and tell phrases and make phrases that are absolutely gorgeous. But when you get a little older, you see some other phrases or some other poems that you're like, how did this not, stick out to me? But with some life experience, you go back to it, and those came out to me, and I highlighted those. But what I was shocked or just a little bit astonished about was I found the themes generally a little bit simpler than what I remembered, obviously, because when I was younger, you're full of passion, you're full of imagination, you're full of desire and crushes and all that kind of stuff. So this is just a masterpiece, and it is a masterpiece still. But the thing that was most shocking and most genius was the fact that the theme and the subject matter is pretty simple, and it's very repetitive, and all the sonnets are basically the same. They're about the same thing, about like two different themes. Yet Shakespeare manages to create it new, to create new ideas and new metaphors and new kind of like outlooks based on just these themes. It reminds me a lot of Johann Sebastian Bach's preludes, I believe they are, and you know, these big fat books of music where he has book 1 and book 2 of the preludes. They're like a staple in all, you know, pianists' practice of music, and yet they're kind of like the same themes or variations on a theme, and yet they're always different. They're always magnified, or some other tone is emphasized. That's kind of like what Shakespeare sonnets are like. Absolutely worthwhile reading. Then I also read Jane Eyre's Charlotte Brontë, which was really good. Absolutely, you know, good, gothic, beautiful, dark, heady. It has everything. It's absolutely beautiful. I believe William Makepeace Thackeray, you know, believed this to be written by a woman because Jane Eyre was anonymous when she wrote this. But it's interesting how before in the culture they didn't believe that a woman would have, you know, written this. It was just too good, and they're like, oh no. But William Makepeace Thackeray, you know, he saw into it and knew that it had to be a woman. Frankenstein, Mary Shelley. Frankenstein, also another woman-written novel that's absolutely worthwhile reading, even darker than Jane Eyre, and you know, very much inspired by Paradise Lost, John Milton, about, you know, God's unfeelingness, that kind of like romanticism of the individual being cast out, or the strange one being cast out, and sort of like Prometheus stealing fire from the gods. Those kind of themes like that's very rich, very dark, and definitely a question to God, like why hast thou made me such so terribly and wonderfully, but also why hast thou made me, or like left me alone, or like the problem of pain. The theological problem of pain is very much, you know, inculcated into the text of Frankenstein and a lot of other things like that, but just very much a worthwhile read. And I also read The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This, I think it's actually supposed to be pronounced Jekyll, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But I also read that this was also on the curriculum of the syllabus. And yeah, just absolutely fascinating as well. And I also read The Suicide Club, which I had read. This is another reread. I had read a long time ago and read that as well. So yeah, that was great. And then I read from the collected works of Oscar Wilde. I have not read the full collected works of Oscar Wilde. I read The Importance of Being Ernest, another one on the curriculum, and very witty and very satiric and very smart and intelligent and worthwhile reading. Really good. I also read by Fyodor Dostoevsky, The Eternal Husband. Really good novel. This one is, you know, always, as with Dostoevsky, everything's really good. This one is quite good. I think the only thing that I haven't, that I've read from Dostoevsky that I didn't absolutely love, which I'm pretty sure if I reread it, I would like it, especially in a better translation, but that was The Gambler. And The Gambler, I liked it a lot and all, but it was just a little bit of a slog, and I just remember going like, oh, I just want to, you know, get through this so I can be done with it. And it was just a lot, you know, it was a lot. I think it was just very wordy or something. Anyways, The Eternal Husband is not like that. I think this one's super satisfying, very engaging and psychological. And it's about, you know, a husband that cannot live without a wife, that just loses their way, and is also like under the power and the dominance of the wife psychologically. And therefore they're the eternal husband. No matter what the wife does, they're always under, you know, like the wife's power. The wife kind of like directs their life, and they kind of like need a wife to live. And they don't have an identity unless they are married to their wife, and like their social status and their social identity and all this kind of like is derived from their wife. And you see this, you see these men a lot, but of course, Dostoevsky speaking specifically probably about Russian society and all this, but it's a global phenomenon. And yeah, anyways, that novel is extremely good to read. Then there is The Landlady by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and it's a good one. It's a great one as well, The Landlady. Very mysterious, very much like plot twist at the end and see what happens or who was who, that kind of thing. It's quite an entertaining read. Next book I read was Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. Lao Tzu, Tao Te Ching. This is not a first-time read. This is also a reread. Something I've read many times or audiobooked. I read 3 different translations, actually, one online and these 2, because I was curious to read it in a different translation because it is a infamously difficult text to translate. So this translation is by D.C. Lau, who is Chinese, so it makes it easier to get a better understanding of the Chinese. And the Lao Tzu, the Tao Te Ching is actually a very complicated text to translate because the manuscripts, the original manuscripts that are found are all fragments. So it's not one full completed scroll. Like most ancient texts, it's completely fragmentary and needs to be patched up and put back together. The problem is that the first people to do this in China did not put it back together the way that it was supposed to be or something. They did it more in an arbitrary fashion based on theme or words or word patterns. So even in one chapter, they're very, very short chapters. Even in one chapter, they usually only take up like a page or less than a page, half a page. When it finishes off a little paragraph and it goes to the next one, it's usually the ideas are divorced one from the other. It probably has a similar theme or similar words, but the actual idea is not the same thing. So that's why it's complicated to read it. One might think, oh, this entire chapter means one thing and I'm supposed to get an idea from here, but it's actually not like that. So you could be led astray a little bit. So it's good to have a good translation with footnotes and all this kind of thing. Aside from that, it is one of my favorite texts that I've ever read. I reread it all the time or get, a little glimpse from it or just peruse it or something like that to get some inspiration. But yeah, it's very enigmatic, powerful, wise. And I think the more you read it, initially probably for coming to it, you might be a little bit confused or it might sound a little woo-woo. I think Taoism is actually where woo-woo probably derives from. But it sounds a little bit woo-woo and a little bit mystical and a little bit just like chaotic and not very clear and vague. But the more one reads it, the more one listens to it, the more one's ear develops to understanding it and the wisdom that is in it. Many of them are very similar to the other wisdom literatures of the world, like Proverbs and other stuff. But I feel like the Tao Te Ching is unique in a way that it always comes from a different angle from understanding things. It always zooms out a bit. But for the most part, I don't know, you can't really speak about it. Just like in the Tao, it says the Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. The Tao, the name that can be named is not the eternal name. And, there's variations on that theme where it's like the Tao that can be spoken of. It's another way to translate that is not the eternal Tao. And how you can't really capture it in words and it escapes from you. Very accurate, but one of the best books you can read. I also read The Tragedy of Dr. Faustus. This also was on the syllabus and on the curriculum, and I had to read this. And this is a reread as well by Christopher Marlowe. Christopher Marlowe, very interesting character, violent and boisterous and a drunkard, apparently, according to historians. But a magnificent work, obviously, and chemist, scientist, person who is obsessed with knowledge, with desiring knowledge and the treasures and passions of the world, sells the soul to the devil to get all those things. Very Mephistopheles, so the devil kind of incarnate or something, or in a spirit. Really good read to read as well. I also read this on the syllabus. This is Beowulf, Burton Rafael's translation. Another reread, always worthwhile reading again and again. I think I'm going to have to try my hand at a different translation because this is such a seminal text, such a legendary text, and absolutely moving. It's a moving, poetic text and astonishing. Written in Old English originally. I cannot read Old English, but every here and now you could read something and go, oh, I understand what that means. I understand what they're saying there, but definitely extremely difficult. Not an easy thing. But in this translation, it was very moving and beautiful. This is the only one that I've reread. And, the hero slays the dragon. And, it has even some Christian touches to it, but that arguably was later on when monks, transcribed it and wanted to keep some of the culture alive. They kind of like Christianized all the Viking, Nordic culture. And the only way to justify keeping it alive was to kind of Christianize it a bit. So there's debate about that, whether they did that or not, I think. It's not 100% sure. But anyway, it's just a miracle of a work to have survived and to have been this good. One definitely to read before you die. And I also read A Days of Reading by Marcel Proust. Never disappoints. Marcel Proust just has a sharp, imaginative, analytical, precise, beautiful mind. He's an artist of artists, in my opinion. And Days of Reading is basically his theories of the importance of reading, what you derive from reading, what kind of attitude you should have reading. One little excerpt from it, the highlights I made, which I made a lot of highlights on this book. He says, reading is on the threshold of the spiritual life. It can introduce us to it. It does not constitute it. There are certain cases, however, certain, as it were, pathological cases of spiritual depression when reading may become a sort of healing discipline and be entrusted by way of repeated incitements with reintroducing a lazy mind perpetually into the life of the spirit. Then books play a role for it analogous to that of psychotherapists for certain cases of neurasthenia. Anyways, there's another passage. He says, all beautiful things. He's talking about beauty here and like really capturing the most beautiful things in culture, or when culture is at the epitome of beauty, the absolute pinnacle of it. He says, all beautiful things were made when the men of the Middle Ages believed in the pure, joyous, and beautiful lesson of Christianity. So I agree with that completely as well. But this one is like, if you want to think about reading more profoundly, or why you're reading, how to read, and how to, how to escape the pitfalls of reading the wrong way, which, reading is great no matter what. It's just a great practice, but it also could be something where, there's a better way to do it, I guess. And Days of Reading by Marcel Proust is a great way to truly understand the importance of it, the devotion of it, the practice of it completely. Another one I read on the curriculum was the Cormac McCarthy's The Road. This one was a reread as well, and it made me just love it all the more. I've only read 2 Cormac McCarthy novels so far, Blood Meridian and this one is my favorite. And I had to write like 5 essays, I think, for this class, and while I was reading this book, and it just made me appreciate it more. See all the themes in it, the complexity of it, and yet its simplicity. It's so simple and accessible, and yet Cormac McCarthy's never very simple and accessible. His language is very perplexing sometimes, or what would you say? It's just unusual. He'll choose unusual words and phrases, very distinct form of language and writing style. Definitely a master of language is Cormac McCarthy, and just for the language itself, it's worth reading. But for the theme of hope, the theme of faith is massive in The Road, and absolutely worthwhile and beautiful. Something else that I never log is the Holy Bible that I read. Each year I read, I don't read the whole Bible each year, but I read books from it, and I never really log them. This was a book that I bought in 2024, I believe, yes, which is the King James Bible. This is R.L. Allen's, I think, long primer, 52 or 53. I think this is the 53 long primer. King James Bible, R.L. Allen, full yap. Absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. My original idea and how I started was to read this one with the ESV study Bible side by side. But it was just too time consuming, and I ended up just reading that, or not really reading other books aside from that. So I just ended up, I'm very familiar with the King James, so started just reading the ESV, reading all the notes in it, and reading just the newness of the language. And if something pops up, and I want to compare it, I'll just go to the King James. But for now, I'm just reading upon the ESV study Bible. Another book that I've been reading actually for years now, so it's not completed, but it's used to be part of my daily reading. Now every once in a while I'll pick something up. I gotta get to it because I'm almost at the end of it. It's kind of it is encyclopedic. It's the Oxford Companion to the Mind by Gregory. I think this is 1984 edition or something like that in the 80s. But this is basically theory of mind, psychology, philosophy of mind, how the brain works, neuroscience, all that kind of stuff. It encompasses so much. I've learned so much through it. This is just a tremendous work. So yeah, almost at the end of it, but I read this, if I started again, I'd probably finish it pretty fast. Absolutely recommended to read something like this just to get immersed in something that is not fiction. And of course, I guess my interests outside of fiction are psychology. Absolutely a huge hunger to understand psychology, to learn more about it, human behavior, behaviorism, conditioning, analysis, all that kind of stuff, and as well as philosophy, of course, which is very related to it. Speaking about psychology and philosophy, here are my top 6 best reads of 2024, starting with Friedrich Nietzsche's The Birth of Tragedy. Birth of Tragedy is a magnificent work. It's my first attempt and crack into Nietzsche, and I remember feeling just this uplifting desire and intellectual satisfaction and just complete immersedness. I cannot speak today. Complete aliveness and just enjoyment when I was reading this, and it's about the Apollonian and the Dionysian, where the Apollonian is reason and symmetry and everything very ordered and thought through, and all that kind of stuff. And the Dionysian is more cathartic, emotion, stuff that lives in the unconscious mind and needs to be embodied. And if it's bottled up, people become ill, and the culture degrades, and everything becomes very methodical and not very. Not very. There's no breakthrough in the life. There's no breakthrough in art, and I guess that's a very rough draft of some of the ideas in it, or the major ideas of it, and yet it's absolutely beautiful, and I agree with that. And you could see the rough draft of the discovery of the unconscious in here, just even in Nietzsche's first book, and so many ideas that and phrases that you realize Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung were inspired by, or got ideas from, and you could just see it in here, clear as day. And yet Friedrich Nietzsche kind of disowns this and calls it sort of like later on artists and romantics kind of came and found a lot of sentimentality in here, or like are just addicted to this and all that. And later on, I think Nietzsche sort of saw this as overly romantic or overly that kind of stuff. So he kind of disowned his own work on this. But I still find it of great beauty. But I'm continuing my Nietzsche journey, and right now, Human All Too Human is very, very. It's more his skeptical, analytical sort of critique of society and culture and all that. So it's Nietzsche very much more thinking Nietzsche, and much more of the critic and the skeptic and the atheist Nietzsche. Another book I read was Zorba the Greek by Nikos Kazantzakis. And this one is, this is something to read. It's not very difficult, very much inspired by Nietzsche as well as Buddhism, Christianity, because Nikos Kazantzakis was kind of a kaleidoscope of ideas and religious thought and experience. So it kind of has those same connections between the Apollonian and the Dionysian as two characters. One of them is very heady, very thoughtful, very theoretical, philosophical, and one of them is very passionate and vivacious and full of desire. And he's a man of action, a man of doing. And so both of these kind of become best friends, and they start rubbing off on each other's theory and ways of life. So the romantic, so the thoughtful, philosophical type starts to become a little bit more acting, starts to, he's kind of like almost like a virgin, or like a, somebody who's not very experienced with women. And so he starts like taking his first steps towards that and to discovering the world in that way, in the way of action and, living life and having experience. Whereas the other character, Zorba, starts to become more thoughtful, more philosophical, and pondering the question of God and philosophy and the meaning of life and all this kind of stuff. But for the most part, it's more about the thinker becoming more of an actor. But you could see those kind of forces playing in the book, and it's something that I would recommend everybody to read. Another book I read that completely blew me away was White Noise by Don DeLillo. White Noise, I would consider the new American novel. I mean, I haven't read too much further in modernity for literature, but as far as this goes, White Noise to me is like a staple of American literature. The critique of our modern age of thinking, consumerism, marketing, television, medication, big pharma, all these kind of things are in here. And it also, you could see a lot of Nietzschean ideas as well in here crop up very much so and influence this book. But it's just, this one is so well written. Don DeLillo is a master as well at writing, at keeping you engaged, at keeping you curious. There's sort of like an eagerness to learn, to understand, all that kind of stuff. And to see through the culture, and he does it little by little. It's not like some, philosophical chapter 1, like this is the meaning of life and like how you're being duped and all the things that you have been led to believe but are lies, or the real way to live, or all this kind of stuff. It's not really like that, and it's not meant to give you all the answers or anything like that. This is fiction, obviously, but it takes this character, this father, of children, some from other marriages with his wife, and there's also apocalyptic themes here, and the big, actually, it's kind of like he had predicted COVID-19 or something like that, because it sounds very accurate to his description of the airborne toxic event, I believe, something like that. It's very similar to it, but this one I would recommend if you're into American literature, want to understand American society better, or just ways in your life. If you are American, you should definitely read White Noise by Don DeLillo. Another book I read is the Book of Chuang Tzu. This one also is another one that, man, I just read good books. That's all I do, because, you only live once. YOLO. So you got to just pick up the big ones. You got to pick up the baddies, and you got to read them, and, just fill your soul with wisdom. This guy's kind of like a Joker of spirituality, but not really. I guess it's not like the Joker from DC Universe, but he's kind of like the court jester a little bit. He has humor, elegance, kind of like conversationality. He's just very wise. This is sort of like, you would call it a sequel to the Tao Te Ching, although you wouldn't really consider it a sequel. It's just a disciple of the Tao Te Ching. Infamous story of him where he dreams that he was a butterfly, and then he questions after waking whether he was the butterfly dreaming that he's a man, Chuang Tzu, or whether he is a man dreaming that he is a butterfly. And so it kind of like, it has all these kind of like hallucinatory sort of psychedelic, qualities to it, but it has the same Taoistic way, teachings and all this, but it's absolutely full of wisdom. It's kind of like reiterating sometimes the same points, but filled with beauty and interesting ways of seeing life and wisdom and experience. Let me just find a highlight. Let's see, just to show you, because I can't even remember right now how good this book was. People live their lives constantly surrounded by anxiety. If they live long before dying, they end up in senility, worn out by concerns. A terrible fate. The body is treated in a very harsh fashion. Okay, that's very easy to understand, right? Kind of. Let's see something else. One whose inner being is fixed upon such greatness emits a heavenly glow. Those whom heaven guides are called sons of heaven. Study is to study what cannot be studied. Undertaking means undertaking what cannot be undertaken. Philosophizing is to philosophize about what cannot be philosophized about. Knowing that knowing is unknowable is true perfection. Those who cannot grasp this will be destroyed by heaven. Another one of those same types is the Dhammapada by the Buddha. This is, I believe, the only original scripture of the Buddha. Not exactly sure about that, but this was written down by the Buddha himself. And I know Buddhist scripture is multifaceted and very, very large. There's a large library, I think 11 times bigger than the Bible or something like that. I'm not exactly sure if that's accurate, but from my memory, I believe it's 11 times bigger than the Bible, all the Buddhist scriptures put together. Yet, this is basically like the Buddhist Bible, and it's very ascetic. So it teaches you a lot of asceticism, a lot about, renouncing your desires, keeping your mind focused and keeping yourself completely, aligned with your true principles, with your true desire, which is the desire for God. And I completely love this book, something I'd reread over and over again as well. And I would recommend the Dhammapada. This translation is by Juan Mascarro. Juan Mascarro, I believe, he's Spanish. The thing that I like about this one is that it kind of takes away a lot of the jargon of Buddhism. It takes away the jargon, and it takes away like the alienation from like Western culture in the language of Buddhism. And it makes it actually more accessible and more Christianized. It'll have like Christian words for things that make it a lot more comparable and compatible with like biblical ideas. Last but not least, this one was on the curriculum as well, but it was only a few stories, but I just was going to read this already. I already had it in my library, so I ended up reading the full thing. This is the Canterbury Tales by Geoffrey Chaucer. And this is the Gilman edition, which is in the original Middle English. Quite, it's not too difficult, but it definitely, it's not Agatha Christie, I would say. I haven't read Agatha Christie. I'm just throwing out a name there. But, it's going to require your brain to kind of like focus a little bit more for sure. And I think it's a good challenge to try to read the Middle English. I definitely used two other translations as well. I used the Neville Coggill translation, which is very accessible, but also maintains the richness of the, as accurately as it can, of the Middle English, but also translating it to a more modern English so you could understand it, and it's much more accessible and all that kind of stuff. And then I read this one, which is sort of side by side, very modern English, and then trying to be true as well to the Middle English side by side. So I would definitely recommend reading, an accessible translation or two different translations or something like that. But the Canterbury Tales, also I would warn, is rated R. Definitely, parts that are extremely raunchy. If you want something raunchier than 50 Shades of Grey, but not being, with those same words, explicit 50 Shades of Grey, it's just very like, oh yes, this is obviously what it's talking about. But something more subtle, more, imaginative. The Canterbury Tales is absolutely filthy. Yes, it definitely is. And yet it's also extremely beautiful, and there are certain genres in it, and different tales in it that are meant to be like spiritual tales to remind you, like devotionals of being, more righteous and more holy and more virtuous and all this kind of stuff, or how to, not be led astray by women, or this kind of thing. And then there's other stuff like the Wife of Bath's tale, which is about how women really hold the true power over their husbands, and how they just let the husband believe that they have the power, but the women really hold the true power and are much smarter than the husbands, and all this kind of stuff. And, it's just so many incredible tales in the Canterbury Tales. It's something that people should definitely read, especially if you're interested in the English language or are reading English or that kind of stuff. You should definitely read the Canterbury Tales. Well, thank you for subscribing and tuning in, and subscribe, like, share, comment. Let me know which one of these books you have read, which ones you liked, which ones you didn't like, which ones you hope to read. See you next time. Thank you. Cheers.